Hey everybody, day 2. Yesterday we tracked and overdubbed on 2 songs. Today we did a couple vocal things, and now we're going to mix these 2 songs, and we'll show you how we do it. So I will say the first thing, most important thing is as mixing, I love when the client's here. We got Eli Reed, singer, artiste, here on the couch.
What's up?
I can't tell you how much more I enjoy mixing when I have the artist here. Everything that I love about music, whether it's the songwriting, the playing, the producing, the engineering, recording, it's because we all get to be in a room together. We all get to work together. We all get to feed off each other's energy. And as you guys know, mixing is kind of like when you get to play the instrument. And so it's really great to have instant feedback, whether it's good or bad. I love when I want to try something crazy and I look back and Eli's either excited or he's pissed off. It's rewarding to know that right away and have him jump in and grab faders too. And he likes to do all the fade outs. So we have a lot of fun when we mix. And I can't stress enough that if you can have the client there, to me, that's the best part, is to always have the client there. So it's a privilege he stayed down from New York with us one more day to mix together. So I recommend always having the client there if you can. So let's see what we did in Studio A. First thing I always do, I don't really care about color codes. This is also because I track with so little tracks. I mean, if you look, most of these tracks we actually hide. We recorded 24 track and I recorded every track going in. So there's a bunch of blank tracks here, but we've got probably under 12 tracks here minus the effects. I don't really color code because I honestly don't have that many tracks where it's hard to look at. If I get mixed projects that are a lot of tracks, I will usually just sum them down instead of color coding, because by the time I color code all of them, I probably could have finished most of the stuff. But also, I'm in a different world here. I don't do templates. I don't have a strict way of doing things. I'm not precious about any part of the recording process, so I kind of just go by how I'm in the mood that day, how I feel, and what I think the song needs. I love mixing on analog. As you can tell by this big, beautiful console, as you can tell by all this outboard gear and all the tape machines in here. It's my favorite thing to do, to be hands-on. I know that sometimes I also will say that I track a specific way. I track with the finished goal in mind. So I'm building the mix as I go. I want it to sound done when the artist like such as Eli comes in the room. I want him to get a sense of like, it sounds like a finished record, not like what we're going to do to it later. So I make a lot of commitments to tape. Doing that, when I get to the mix stage, oftentimes I've already kind of built the mix enough where I don't need to do much but do little rides and stuff. And so I try and keep it like I've always felt it like that. I build the mix as I go, and that way I don't start with the drums for 2 hours when I start mixing, and I'm not in the same headspace, so they don't always sound the same. So I try and keep that excitement of what we felt on day one always building in the Pro Tools mix. We had the mix on the console in there, so coming in here, I've got to adjust a couple things to get back to where that was, but I have my rough mix to reference, so I can do that rather quickly. Normally, I would break this out onto the board. I feel like today we made so many great commitments to tape that all I need to do is a couple of automation rides in Pro Tools. So I'm going to build this mix quickly in Pro Tools and do a couple things with real analog gear, maybe on individual channels or on the 2-bus. And if I feel like I'm not getting the gel I want from summing analog, then I will break it out really quickly on the board. And the beautiful thing about that is, as I showed you on tracking, I like for my mix to be kind of there with all the faders at 0. So it's not a whole lot of regaining where I was at, even if I break it out on the console. So I'll kind of quickly play with it, and I feel like I'm losing something, I'll go to the board. And really, there's no rules, there's no right or wrong answers to this. It's kind of completely by feel, guys. So you just got to do, if you feel like the way you tracked it needs some more love, then I would send it through some other stuff. But we both, Eli and I, felt really great about what we had in there. So I'm going to see if it feels great in here, just bringing it up, and we'll adjust. So what I've got right now is everything just coming out through a bus in the box, and we'll see what we do. I love mono drums. I record drums mono. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put all these to one channel. And what I'll probably do is actually print these to a channel, so I just have to look at one channel. But we'll start like this. And I'll kind of show you something that I've been working on for a while here. When we tracked the song, if you guys watched the tracking video, kind of broke the rule of what I said in the first song. On the first song, I said I don't like to hit tape hard. And that's true, I mostly don't. On the second song, Eli had a really kind of dirty, funky track that I wanted to be aggressive on. So I overloaded the channel preamps to get the snare really distorted, to get the vocal distorted. In doing that, it hits the tape a little harder. So you'll kind of see here, I hit the tape harder, except I didn't want to hit the kick drum too hard because I didn't want to lose the impact of the kick drum. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip gain up the kick drum just a hair to get it like the other ones. And I might clip gain them down a little bit to give myself some headroom. The cool thing about burl converters, which is what we tracked on and what I'm going to mix on, is of all the converters out there, they're the ones that you can hit a little bit harder and be okay. They've got these big fat transformers on every channel, and so the harder you hit it, the more color you get. Obviously, at some point, it gives up. If I was tracking this on like an Apogee or an Avid, I wouldn't be hitting them this hard. I'd save myself a little bit more room. But with the burls, they kind of get more tone out of them that way, so I was able to do that. I like to change up how I mix pretty much all the time. I used to EQ like the kick drum a little bit, I used to EQ the snare a little bit, used to EQ the overhead a little bit, and I stopped doing that after a while because I felt like I was losing something. And so what I started doing is just either printing all the drums to one track or summing them and then EQing just the mono drum kit. And I felt like just going a little bit goes a long way. And I'll kind of show you a good starting place you can do. Of course, I didn't use any EQ when I tracked these drums. I thought they felt pretty good. So we're going to bring these up. So I clip gain the kick up. I'm going to hit a little bit more so I can have that fader at 0, and I got the kick kind of where I want it. I'm just going to guess here. I hit this a little less to the tape than I did the snare because I wanted that snare to splat, as you can tell. So as I was telling you about the Spectrasonics, look at the snare. See the transient on the kick drum and then the snare? Hitting that pre-hard, it just kind of it gets rid of some of the transients, but it sounds very musical. I got my drums kind of there, and I'm going to hit a little hard. I'll show you what I was talking about with an EQ, so I'm just going to grab something. Let's see, I'll just do an E for now, because it's got a gain control that I can quickly gain. So I'm going to whack it down. Instead of EQing just the kick drum and adding a little low end on the kick drum, and then maybe EQing something in the snare or the overhead, I like the Neve 1073 Legacy because the EQ button's already pushed in and it saves you milliseconds of your time. I've got bands here, 110, 60. So the cool thing about this is if I click on 60 or 30, I'm going to really just adjust the fundamental of the kick drum. I can bring up the thickness of the kick drum, and I'll affect the snare slightly, but not so much. If I do 110, I'm going to be adding low into the kick and the snare. When you have it on the whole drums as a whole, I feel like when you EQ the drums together, less EQ goes a long way. And also, it does more to gel the drum kit together as one. So I will do this and see what you think. And at home, try this and try EQing your drums separately and then just as one. And I think you'll see a pretty cool difference when you do it together. Keep in mind, every time you EQ, you're effectively phase shifting. So if you EQ individual drums, you're actually phasing your drums a little bit and you're losing some of that tight image you work so hard to get when you record it. So let's see what we do. Okay, so that's 60 hertz. I'll hit bypass and unbypass, see what it does even to the snare drum at that low of a frequency. That's pretty cool. I like what it does to everything. Let's try 110. Now keep in mind I'm losing gain because I've clipped the Neve down a little bit just to give myself some headroom in Pro Tools. So you're going to hear a level loss, but here the EQ difference is pretty awesome. Be real goofy and try 220. Well, I kind of like the 60. Now, in the same consequence of the mid-range band, you've got all these EQ points like 1.6, 5, 3.2. 1.6 is great because it brings out kind of the attack of the kick drum and also gives up kind of the bottom part of the snare. It gives you more of the, not so much the snare hit, but some of the sound. So let's see what it does. Here's 3.2. Immediately, I really like the 1.6, and I don't know what those dots are. I'm assuming that's what, 1 dB or 2 dB? I'll leave the top band alone for now and just see what we do. So immediately, Leroy, our wonderful bass player, plays with his thumb. So you're not going to get some of that nice pick attack. So I'm going to add a little bit to bring out the pick attack and do one or two little things. I do a little bit of filtering on the bass. I like to give the kick drum the more bottom part of the low end. I'll just roll off a little bit here. One thing I love about filtering like that, it's kind of like brightening it at the same time. You can think about rolling off the low end as kind of turning up everything else a little bit. But by filtering that, you can kind of feel like you clean up the bass or make it a little brighter instead of EQing other things. One funny thing I learned recently, I was over at Royal Studio with the great Boo Mitchell engineers, and they put a DBX 160. I saw a piece of tape on it that said bass. And I never thought of this as a bass compressor. I always did something slower. This track, Leroy really kind of steps out and does some cool walk lines. So a little fast compressor, barely grabbing it, I think will help identify some of his notes better and tame it. So the DBX is real simple. One of the things I love about it, you just have a threshold, a compression, and output gain. I don't want to do too much to it, so I'm going to do 3 on the ratio. And I just wiggle this so it's barely moving the needle on some of the bigger moments. As you'll see, the great thing about Leroy, he played in all the old Al Green records, you don't really hear him. You just kind of feel him until a certain moments where he really steps out. You'll really hear him step out on this song on the outro. So I don't want to squash him. Leroy also is beautiful with his dynamics. So when guys play with their thumb, they dig in and they don't dig in for reasons. So when you overcompress, you're losing all of that. So I didn't compress them on the way into tracking. So I'm just doing a little bit now just to lock them in a little bit. And by putting that fast compressor on there, I feel like it really kind of pokes through. And then I'm just going to do a little EQ, probably around 800 or 1.5. And this helps, like I said, with the thumb playing for it to the bass just to poke through a little bit. One thing I pretty much never do is add low end to a bass guitar. If you record it properly, there's so much low end there. I feel like I'm just not good enough to EQ the bottom of a bass. Every time I do, I feel like it gets too woofy and I'm constantly playing with it. So I'll just add a little bit of mid-range here. Here's 800. By itself, it may not sound great, but we'll double check that at the end in the mix and see if it helps us a little bit. I have a feeling it will. I'm going to do some quick things here and just move the vocal down. I like to have all my rhythmic stuff and harmonic stuff happening here, so I'll move the piano down by the guitar and the keys, and I'll put the horn and the background vocals down here.
I had no idea what his bass line was.
Yeah, isn't it
now
wild?
I'm listening to it and it's so badass. It is like killing.
You just feel them, then you hear them. So.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to add a fab filter, and part of this is just I'm literally lowering the gain, almost so you could do a clip gain, but I just want to get myself where I can get the fader up higher to 0. We hit everything, like I said, really hard on this to tape so I could get the sounds I wanted, but now I want to bring them back down just so I have headroom in Pro Tools, because you always want to leave yourself some headroom here. And what I'm just going to do is also check the low-end filtering. Now, I love FabFilter. It's one of my favorite plugins. I think it's great for cutting. It doesn't really have a sound, so if you're looking for a tonal quality to your EQ, FabFilter would not be the way to go, I'd say. But if you want to do surgical or just simple EQ points without really affecting your sound, it's a great way to go. I highly recommend you go to natural phase. It sounds the most natural to me. If you A/B it, it really makes a difference. So on a guitar, electric guitar, I know there's not going to be anything really below 90, 80 hertz. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some of the low-end rumble. Same thing with the piano. I'm going to look at it. So I'll add in the B3 now, the lovely Charles Hodges, who's amazing. I mic this with an AEA R88. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to a bus simply because it's funner to move one fader than two. Now I've committed. I use the ribbon because I like what it automatically does to the bottom and the top. We had it about halfway down the organ, and that really helps you from getting too much motor noise, wind noise, stuff like that. It's not too shrill. I don't like it when the B3 is too shrill. Do this real quick. And I'm going to gray these S's out so I can just hear it.
Your temperature rising, you just can't stay cool. This show ain't some.
One thing I'm going to do, I usually do B3 mono. While we were tracking this, I know we had the electric guitar, and we were going to do something on the right. And the B3, Charles does these amazing swirls. So part of what's cool when you mic it stereo, if you mic the B3 right without phase issues, as much as you can with the Leslie, you can hear him sliding and it'll go around and it'll pan across the thing. So it's nice little movement motion that's going to happen here. I'm going to bring in the vocal quickly. I think it's important to have the vocal in as soon as you can.
You learned about in school. You can't buy it. You can't steal it. You can't fake it. You got to feel it.
So our B3's hot. I'm going to do the same thing with our FabFilter. Mostly this is just to turn the level down a little bit. I got room to go. We're going to do about 6 dB because that was hot. And also I'm planning on probably putting a hardware insert on the 2 bus, so I'm kind of planning ahead for that.
It fits you like a hand in a glove.
So a couple things on the B3. I don't really want anything too low here. I don't want to muddy up my beautiful low end with Leroy, so I'm going to roll just some basic stuff off the bottom. And actually a little bit off the top. I like my B3 to be a little bit more mellow.
Pretty baby, that's love. I wanna tell you that's love. You let me tell you that's love. Oh, oh, let me tell you that's love. Ooh, I wanna tell you that's love.
The first song we had the Masquerader, so I had a background vocal mic out there. I left it on for this because you never know when a room mic is cool, so let's check that out. Go ahead in the song.
On the right track.
We got the old vocal in there, and we actually hit a new vocal on this, so I'm going to go ahead and hide this because I got enough room sounds anyway.
Buy it. You can't steal it.
Now, Eli and I are both massive Willie Mitchell fans. As you can see, I like hard panning. Most of those old records, the horns are on the right, so I'm a Memphis man. The horns are always on the right.
There's no going back when your feet start moving. You're on the right track. Oh, yeah.
All right, guys, so I just spent about 2 or 3 minutes there. I got the balance back to how I felt like it was in Studio A. Everything's kind of sitting in the general spot. I'm going to do some automation. One of the first things I like to do really quickly early on is see if I need anything on the 2-bus. I don't do much compression. I really never EQ the 2-bus, but I have a little chain I've been working on lately that I really like. As I brought this Pro Tools up, you saw I did the fat filter where I'm gaining a few things down. That's strictly so I have my faders right about 0, so you have your maximum resolution for rides. If you get too low and your gain's really high, it's really hard to make minuscule rides that I like to do. So I try and keep all the faders right about there. So one of the cool things about Pro Tools is called a hardware insert. This is a great way to integrate your outboard gear into a digital world. It's just like patching something on the patch bay. I've got a 2-mix set up on my patch bay on the outputs 17 and 18 of my burls. They're going to these V610s made by Spectrasonics. They're kind of a mastering version of their 610 that I love so much. Directly coming out of the Spectrasonics V610, I'm patched into my Fairchild 670 copy. It's made by a guy named Palm Audio in England. He hand makes these, even hand makes the knobs. This one's pretty cool because it's loaded with original Fairchild transformers. It's a newer toy of mine. We used it in tracking. We used it on Eli's previous record. Actually, I got it the day we started mixing, so we had to bust it out. It has a couple cool features. It's got a full bypass switch. It's got a side chain filter for the compression signal. It's got a parallel mix section. I'll show you guys this section. It's pretty cool. He does it in a beautiful way where there's no phase shift. So it's pretty amazing that at least I can hear. And I have a couple mods where if I put it on 3 on the time constant, I can actually dial in my own time. So I'm going to kind of play with this for a second and see if it helps or hurt our mix. If it doesn't help, we won't put it in there. Like I said, a hardware insert I've got on 17 and 18. You can actually label these in your I.O. and it makes it super cool and easier to recall. So here we go, 17, 18. We're going in the V610s. I'm going to bypass the Fairchild so I can just hear the V610s at first. To demonstrate what this V610 does, I'm going to do a simple thing here and make sure I'm pretty fairly locked down my left-right. So my drums are mono. I'm going to put just a quick signal tone generator on here, and I'm going to double check that I've got my left-right is pretty close here. So see that it's analog gear, so you're going to have a little bit of fluctuations. The V610 is detinted, so we're off just a little bit of like 1/10 of a dB or so, but we'll be okay. So I've kind of checked that. I'm doing ratio-wise maybe 2 to 1 in a fairly fast release. So super fast attack, super fast release, and I'm barely tickling it. But like I said, a Spectrasonics, I could show you recording-wise. You can do this if you have a Spectrasonics 610. They used to do this to demonstrate how fast they were, but they have enough gain to be a mic pre. You could plug a 57 into one of those, drop the 57 on the ground with your speakers wide open, and it won't blow your speaker. It's so fast it tracks the waveform of the pop, and it won't let it go. If you've ever recorded tambourine, you know it's one of the hardest things to record. Even if you're 10 feet back with the mic pre barely up, it'll have this kind of clipping sound, even though your levels are all way low. Those are peaks and voltage, and they're big voltage peaks to your mic pre. The guy who invented this compressor in '66 thought that was one of the worst things about audio was these voltage peak swings. So he built a compressor that's so fast it'll nab those peaks. Like I said, it's about 50 nanoseconds. So you can literally put a really hot microphone, a U47, a U87, a foot or two away from a tambourine. If you have that thing before your mic pre, it'll grab all those peaks. You can turn your mic pre up and you won't have any of that weird tambourine clipping sound. You can always also try with keys. You know, anything kind of high-pitched rattly will clip really fast. Really big, fast transient stuff. So the V610s are really cool. When you listen, check out what it does. You're not going to really hear compression. It's so fast that you're never going to hear pumping or anything like that. But it's just a nice kind of glue that brings it all together, and your mastering guy will really recognize your headroom that's happening later because you're getting rid of some of these voltage peaks. Listen how the track feels like. To me, it feels a little unsettled right now. There's things that need to be written. There's things that kind of poke out left to right. And then when we listen to the V610, it still has the punchiness, and it almost feels even more punchy, but it also feels like things are kind of more congealed together where you don't need to do as much riding or things bouncing left to right. So let's check it out. Without.
Love. You can't see it, no, but you know it's there. When you smell something sweet in the midnight air, whoa, you can't fake it. That's love. You can't see it, no, but you know it's there. When you smell something sweet in the midnight air, whoa, you can't fake it. You can't.
For lack of a better word, I feel like that glues everything a little bit together. By doing that, I don't compress much anyways. I didn't compress any of the stuff going in except the vocal. It makes you, instead of compressing things individually, you can kind of do this. And like I said, it's like the drum EQ. A little bit goes a long way. So maybe a dB at a 2 to 4 ratio, and it's pretty awesome. And let's add the Fairchild now. I was waiting for Eli to go, okay, I don't like that. That doesn't sound good.
That's love. You can't see it, no, but you know it's there. When you smell something sweet in the midnight air.
And this really helped me out when I first started out. Like I said, is knowing where your headroom is, knowing where your gain is. So leaving yourself room to do these things. I built the mix up knowing I was going to maybe put something on the 2 bus, knowing these are going to add a little bit pieces of gain, knowing that I'm going to be right about where I want to be at 0 on the fader, where your fader's at the natural position. It'll feed that compressor just like I want, where I'm just tickling it. And now I'm going into my Fairchild. I've got the input on the Fairchild up to about 1 o'clock because I want to hit the Fairchild a little bit hard and get some tubes glowing and hitting them. And I've got the threshold barely on because I really don't want to do any compression. I'm just seeing tonally if the Fairchild helps. And then I'll see if the compressor tickling a little bit really is nice. Now, the cool thing, like I said about this compressor, it's got a parallel mix knob. So once I get my threshold like I like, where I see it kind of happening, I'm going to bring in the parallel mix from dry to wet, and you can see what it does by just adding a little bit in.
Whoa, you can't fake it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from.
Now you're going to hear me slowly bring in the parallel mix, and I'll kind of find a spot I like, and then I'll play it A-B for you and see what it sounds like. I'll stay on the same spot.
That's love. You can't see it, no, but you know it's there. When you smell something sweet in the midnight air. Whoa,
So this will be 100% wet now.
you can't fake it, you can't make it, but when you got it.
And to me, that's a little too much compression, so I'm going to back this down to maybe about 3 because I like what happened there, and let's hear that.
Oh, you can't fake it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love. Oh, it's.
So here's without it.
You can't fake it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love. Oh, you can't fake it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love.
So I think we're going to stick with that. Now I've got the 90 hertz on, so I'm not really affecting the lower end of the kick drum and the bass. I'm just kind of getting some more upper stuff. So let's start with that and see what happens. While we were listening back there, I heard a couple of P's. We went through a RCA 77 without a pop filter. The 77 actually has a natural pop filter built into that beautiful grill cloth. So it did most of the work, but I'm going to roll just a little bit off of Eli's voice so we don't have some plosives. Put on the right vocal first.
You can't make it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love.
I'm going to drag over fat filter to the horns, like I said, just to bring that gain down a little bit, because I'm going to ride these horns some.
Oh, you can't make it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love. Oh, it's gonna grab you.
So one thing I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put a trim plug in just on the 2 bus. And why I'm going to do this is I think I'm hitting the Spectrasonics just a hair hard on these bigger sections, and I just want to whack it down so I'm getting where I am now, but only on the bigger section. So let's try 3 dB and go back to that bridge, because I'm going to do some writing so I know it's going to get a little louder.
Oh, you can't make it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't.
Because I did that, I'm going to add just a hair on this parallel mix.
Oh, you can't make it, you can't make it, but when you got it, you can't shake it. Oh, like the heavens raining down from above. Pretty baby, that's love. Oh, it's gonna grab you, and it won't let you go. Try if you wanna.
Cool. Ian and I, while we were talking about this, we thought this might benefit from some slapback. So I'm actually going to group the vocals here real quick and bring them down a hair because I got them hot.
Oh, you can't make it, you can't make it, but when you got it.
Cool. And let's add a fader. So make a track here. And I'm going to do a couple just maintenance things too while I'm at it. We had the plate reverb going and they set up as 2 mono tracks. I'm going to make it my life easier and just make it a stereo when I do this again. So I'm going to hide these. And I'll redo this. And I like to put my effects down here. This is a rough mix. I'm going to actually move this over to our 2-print section and just make it inactive so I don't accidentally unmute it and get phasey. I'm going to actually use some real slapback echo here. I'm going to use my full tone tube tape echo. Slapback. Now, one of the things I love is when all the effects go in together. You can sit here and put just a slapback on the guitar, then do another slapback on the vocal, blah, blah, blah. But all the old school records, they all fed into the same thing. And it really makes a difference, you guys. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to set the slapback echo. Also, I screwed up, guys. The way we've got this routed for PureMix for you guys to hear, this is the easiest way for us to do it because I don't have an AES card. Is I've got all our 2 mix basically has come out of bus 2122. And then I've got a master fader, which that's bus 2122. And I'm printing back into a 2-track because I'm using analog gear on the 2 bus. And also, I'll show you why I do it this way. But I'm sending up here out 9 and 10. That is my send to you guys at PureMix. So the B3, when I put it to an aux, I didn't assign it to bus 2122. So we were hearing it, but it wasn't coming to you. So I screwed up. You guys should fire me off this mix. I told you you're going to learn what not to do, and you just learned it. So now it's that slapback echo. I've got on input 20, so I'm going to turn on my Echoplex and see what we like some slapback. I love about a 15-inch slapback. I love these full tones so much, I kind of know where that is. That's usually right about 5 here. I've got 100% wet with just like 1 repeat. So I just want a simple slapback, and I'll adjust this time a little bit. Let's see.
When you get started, there's no going back.
So one thing to keep in mind, when you're doing this in input, you're actually hearing, some delay compensation. So it is not as fast as it would be if I printed this and listened back. So it's a little bit longer because I'm in input mode. So that's something to keep in mind when you do some of these things. There is a delay for monitoring like this in input mode.
When you get started, there's no going back. When your feet start moving, you're on the right track. Oh yeah.
I'm going to tighten it up just to make it a hair faster for myself.
But like it dry.
Like dry, that's fine. That's totally fine.
When you get started, there's no going back.
I just like how present everything is right now.
I'm with you 100%.
You know what I'm saying?
So great thing about having the client here is if I put that slap back on a mix, I would have had a recall already. But since he's here, we can keep going. So I love it. So we're going to keep the slapback fader up in case we want to send something else. But we'll kill the vocal. And let's go back to our plate that we had going. I need to move it because we've given Fab those outputs.
When you get started, there's no going back.
So all I'm patching, guys, is I'm doing digital sends to analog effects. So I've got my plate back that we had in the tracking room to 5 and 6 now. So I can put sends on any fader and send it to a real plate reverb and have it coming back to us in Pro Tools. There's a lot of things that digital does really good. There's nothing like a real chamber or a real plate. There's just something magic to it. So I'm going to put this back a little bit and keep it low.
When you get started, there's no going back.
So let's keep going here. I'm just going to do a little effect things and we're going to just play and we're going completely by feel here, just seeing what feels good.
When you get started, there's no going back.
One thing I'm going to do is just darken this plate. I like when the reverb's a little bit darker and they kind of just feel like you feel them more than you hear them so much. Actually, I'm going to do this with the DSP because we're in input mode. First thing I do is just kind of do some filtering. And I'll kind of play with this. And you can really hear in the mix, if you guys darken or filter your reverbs or do thin them out or boost certain frequencies, you can really hear it, how it settles in the track differently. And a lot of times I'll just throw up a quick, simple delay if I want to pre-delay this thing a little bit. I'll usually start around 90 milliseconds, but I might not use this at first.
When you get started, there's no going back. When your feet start moving, you're on the right track.
So just by rolling that slope and moving up to about 5K where the slope starts, I don't have a lot of that top plate and it feels nicer to me. It feels like it fits more on the track. Not as noticeable, but you feel the depth to it.
When you get started, there's no going back. When your feet start moving, you're on the right track. Oh yeah, you can't buy it, you can't steal it, you can't fake it, you got to feel it. Oh, it fits you like a hand in a baby, that's love.
Still hearing a little bit of the pop, so we're going to move the filter just a little more, maybe towards 90. Real gentle on the vocals. We just brought the guitar down a little bit because it was overpowering a little bit. We want to have that more as a rhythmic thing. I love the way the drums sound. I love the way they're sitting in the mix. I've got the mix great now where we've got kind of some effects going. And Eli and I are pretty happy. We're going to do some adjustments and talk. Once I get all that done, I'm going to start writing this thing, and then it's going to be done. I've got the EQ, I think, right, which is what you guys saw just a little bit. And I want to do a parallel compressor. Basically, I wanted the parallel compression, not so much for compression, but more kind of distortion and stuff. I'm going to use a 610 Spectrasonics compressor, which is great for compressing. It's also great to saturate and overload a little bit. And by doing that, I just want the drums a little bit trashier. We overload the preamps, like I said, when we track to get a sound. And I just want to be a little more aggressive with it. I'm going to put this on as a hardware insert just so I can hear the whole kit together after the EQ. And then I'm going to, if I like it, I'm going to print this to a second track on Pro Tools so I can blend it in. It's important to make sure you like your EQ and stuff first if you're doing an analog piece of gear and you're printing it, because if I EQ the drums after this, there will be a slight phase shift difference that would bug me. I would hear it and I would know. So I kind of wait till I get it where I like. So I'm going to mess with this for a second. So by adjusting the release on this, I can get more kick drum bottom or more attack through this compressor. It's kind of a really cool compressor. And I'm hearing it basically what you would think of 100% wet right now. So soloed, it sounds like a little over the top. But when we blend that in with the regular drums, it's going to give us just a little bit more weight and saturation, which I think is what we're going to want. So let's just see. So here's without the compressor. So you're not hearing a lot of pumping because the compressor is so fast. But what you are hearing is kind of some more saturation, the snare splatting a little bit more. And that's what I kind of wanted to see if I blend that in, if that's going to help this drum kit a little bit. This is all, to me, really subtle stuff because I really love the way it sounds. So I'm going to print this and then I'll blend it in by doing this. So one thing I'm going to do real quick, guys, is when you print this, I've got stuff on the 2-bus. You've got plugins going. Even if your converter, which there's only a certain amount of converters do automatic delay compensation, you never know what's going to happen. So I always print a 1K tone, or I'll do white noise depending if it's really frequency dependent. I'm going to put this at the beginning of the track on the kick drum, just on one channel mono. And I'm going to print the parallel I'm doing. I should probably name the track. Call this drum para 610, so I know. I'm going to print this with that tone, and I'm going to double check and line up the tones so there's no phase shift.
Here we go. 1, 2.
And while it's printing, I'll usually turn the speakers down and just give myself an ear break for a second. I know the sample difference on my converter right now, it's 17, but I just showed you how you can kind of measure yourself and look so you can kind of see the difference. And then you go up to nudge and go to samples, and I know mine's 17, so I'm going to pop it in. So I moved mine 17 samples. So now I'm going to take the hardware insert off the drums because I think I got where I like. I mean, you're kind of guessing a little bit because I'm doing this as a parallel. So I'm going to bring this down and kind of blend it in. Oh, I've routed this to print, so I'm going to put this back.
When you get started, there's no going back.
It kind of makes the bottom snares almost like the snare just be a little more splatty. And we'll see if we like it or not. I'm going to listen to the track for a while and see if it helps.
You got to feel it. Oh, it fits you like a hand in a glove. Pretty baby, that's love. You can't see it, no, but you know it's there.
You know what's cool? I don't really like it, so we're going to take it out and just leave it like it was.